We have a break for Christmas Day with no papers, but they're back because it's Boxing Day, and with us to review them, the journalist and author Yasmin Alibhai-Brown and the sociologist Ashley Frawley. Lovely to see you both. Let's start with you this hour, Ashley. On the front of the Mail, one of many papers leading on the King's speech yesterday. It's gone on the message of love and hope, and talking about how the King made reference to his mum who died.
Yes, the Mail is joining in, reporting that King Charles is only the second British monarch to deliver a televised Christmas address, which is a bit amazing if you think about how long television has been around. And, you know, last night it was interesting because LBC Radio asked, is the King more in touch with the mood of the country? And a lot of people were commenting that yes, the King did seem to be more in touch, and there was a lot of people felt a connection to, you know, the fact that Charles had lost a number of family members and had paid tribute to the Queen, and so on. But I think also about the paying tribute to health and social care workers. But of course, he's able to give these kinds of tributes, to give these sort of, I suppose, platitudes, because unlike the government, he is not in the direct position of needing to put something behind those words in terms of better working conditions and pay. So I think in spite of a lot of the positive messaging, and it seems that the papers have just a lot of the papers have really gone on with a quite positive portrayal of this. And of course, it's a very light message. I think a lot of people across the country can be forgiven for thinking that while talk is cheap, it's easy to say that you feel for people who are going through difficulties, that to give tributes to NHS workers and so on. But at the end of the day, people will need some help. People will need better working conditions, better pay to get through this kind of crisis. And as I said, talk is cheap.
And Yasmin, you picked out the inside of the Mirror, of the Sun, sorry. And you know, you describe yourself as certainly not a royalist, but I thought that the King's point about this being the time of year when those who are lost are most remembered by families was particularly poignant and did perhaps hit home.
Well, of course, you know, people who love the royal family will be moved by this. But there are two things I want to say about the Sun's coverage. The front page was the King of Hearts. He's not. They're trying to echo Diana. And Diana, in her time, really touched people's hearts. And I think that for the Sun, which recently has had to apologize for that grotesque column by Jeremy Clarkson with his violent fantasies about Meghan Markle, and they've prominently put on the inner pages pictures of Harry and Meghan and how they've lost out. I found it really unpleasant that a newspaper which has done what it's done to Meghan Markle is in a very sly way bigging up the King. This is a kind of brainwashing, I'm sorry, but also using it again to slight Meghan Markle and Harry. And the King, if he really is this benevolent, ought to have included them in his speech. That would have given him moral authority. He chose not to. So I think this is quite a complicated case study on how the media does the royal family, really.
Interesting. I mean, actually, do you think he should have talked about Harry and Meghan in his speech? He did talk about them just after the Queen died and made it clear they're very much part of the family, but that was, of course, before this documentary was released.
Well, it was, of course, part of, before the documentary, but also part of an event that had happened that very much affected Harry. And so it was necessary to reach out to family members. I think in this, it would have been interpreted too much. You know, the media would have been all over it. It would have created quite a lot of controversy. And I suppose they must have judged that it was wise not to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And I think that makes a bit of sense. Yes, okay, you could say that it was an opportunity that was missed, but I think they must be well aware that these sorts of things have to be dealt with incredibly delicately, and at the moment it seems like they are not quite sure how to deal with it at all.
Actually, you've also picked a story inside The Guardian on page 13. This is about Nigel Farage and also a Labour surge. They think that both of these things combined could lead to the loss of quite a lot of Tory seats. Who are the big names that we might lose?
Yeah, that's right. So they're reporting that seats held by, Ian Duncan Smith, Dominic Raab, are among a swath of seats that are at risk. A lot of them were held by, very slim majorities, or won by very slim majorities in 2019. And so if there is a resurgent Labour, if Nigel Farage comes back into politics, which he's been dropping hints he might do, then it's possible that these seats would be lost or greatly at risk. And I think there is and particularly as well, Farage has an immigration issue to capitalize on now, and so there are lots of incentives for him to do so. And I think this kind of speaks to a real issue that we have in politics at the moment, in that there's this huge gap in terms of representation. There are lots and lots of voters who don't feel that the mainstream parties, including Labour, really represent their interests, really represent the kind of bread and butter issues that affect their lives. And I think I think there's a risk that we can read, Nigel Farage and any success that he might have in returning to politics as a resurgence of the populist right, when in fact it speaks to a lack of legitimacy on the part of mainstream parties, and people, sort of moving away from them in a context of very, very few viable alternatives. And that's something that we're going to need to grapple with. And I'm not sure that anyone really is doing so in a realistic way. It's just been sort of business as usual. The Tory party demonstrating a certain amount of difficulty controlling their own party, let alone the issues that affect the country, and Labour benefiting from that. But I think it's less because of something that Labour themselves has done to conduct some soul searching about their ability to connect with the electorate.
And Yasmin, that ties in with another piece that you've picked out in the Eye about Labour at a Blair-style lead after support for Tories unravelled. And would you concur with what Ashley is saying, that this isn't necessarily about Labour being brilliant, it's just possibly about the Tories being a bit rubbish and there not being a great alternative?
Well, yes, it's that, but also I think we have to now, for a very long time, for several years now, since the Brexit vote, there's been this, I think, over-emphasis and focus on these blue wall Tory voters, new Tory voters, and them not feeling connected to what the parties are doing. I disagree with Ashley that these are the people we should be focusing on. We've been focusing on these people for a very long time. What is interesting, though, is this is in the Eye inside pages, John Curtis, who's the kind of god of surveys and polling evidence. He's done a poll of polls, and can never say this word properly, and he's found that the gap now between Labour and the Tories, although the Tories have recovered a bit under Sunak, should bring them, if nothing catastrophic happens, a victory similar to what happened in 1997. And I think that those voters who will go to reform are those who, in spite of all the evidence we now have about the impact Brexit is having on the economy, on all sorts of things, just are completely consumed by that. Farage will capitalise on that. But I think for the rest of the population, other issues are beginning to be much more important. Jobs, all the usual issues that we've talked about in today. And so this is quite interesting that Labour, by being steady and not too dramatic, and I think, in my view, too cautious about saying Brexit was a mistake. They're refusing to say that. So they're playing it cautiously, and it's working for them.
We're going to have to stop it there because we're out of time. But thank you both so much, Yasmin and Alibi, for giving up your Boxing Day morning and bringing us the papers here on Sky News. Lots more to come after the break.